help of Hashem, we are learning Yoma Daf Ayin. We left off on Daf Samach Tes Amud Beis. We're going to be going back to the Mishnah in the beginning of the 7th chapter that's going to be speaking about the Torah reading of the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur. And again, I know we spoke about this in the intro to the last daf, but we got the Baruch Hashem, we got into the previous amazing daf, so we are a little bit behind. But we're going to be speaking now about why can't you roll a Sefer Torah in the public, the concept of Kavod Tzibur, the reason why in the Beis HaMikdash they did not even bring out 2 Sifrei Torah, which would have prevented the need to roll from one Sefer Torah to the other. And why is that? And then we're going to go weiter with the last Mishnah that's going to speak about the Avodah. In other words, like we mentioned, the 7th chapter is still a pre-Yom Kippur Bizman Hazeh, with the 5 Inuyim, which was always including Bizman Hazeh. But the last Mishnah that's speaking about the steps that happened in the Beis HaMikdash, the Avodah, that will end with the words that we end in today's Tefillas, right? That the feast that the Kohen Gadol prepared to his friends, B'Shasha Yotza B'Shalom and HaKodesh, will be in Daf Ayin, and we're going to have many details about the Karbanos of Musaf, when they were brought. Part of the Mishnah will be ambiguous. The Gemara is going to have to bring both a Tanach Devei Shmuel and a Tosefta to clarify all of the detailed karbanos, when was it brought, and we'll see various opinions, including there's going to be amongst other animals that are part of the Musaf. You have that which is mentioned in Parshas Pinchas, that there were 7 sheep that were brought. Question is, were they brought connected after Tamid Shel Shachar? Are they connected and brought prior to the Tamid Shel Bein Harbayim? We're going to actually learn a Gemara Machlokes that these 7 sheep were divided. And there's a Machlokes, how were they divided? Either 1 connected to the morning and 6 in the afternoon, or 6 connected to the morning and 1 in the afternoon. We'll see the reasons behind it. We will also be learning about the concept that all karbanos ideally should be from the mufchar, should be from the choicest animals, the most outstanding animal that you have. Now, we're going to see that this is something that needs to be emphasized specifically, both by karbanis that are of nedava. One could have argued that if a carbon is nedava, whatever you're doing is beyond the letter of the law, it's already good. Maybe dafke there should you bring the choicest animal. There is a logic to say that a carbon chayva should have to be dafke from the choices, because to prove that you're not just doing it because you're obligated. For that you could have brought a simpler animal. And each one has a maila and taka. According to some, the Torah needed to write twice the concept that a carbon should be from the choices to teach us that whether you're bringing an adava, whether you're bringing a chayva, there is an inyan, again, lechatchila, to bring it from the best and the most choicest animal, and much, much more. Let us begin on Daf Samach Tes Amud Beis. We are 6 lines right from the bottom of the Amid, referring back to the Mishnah in the beginning of the Perek on Daf Samach Tes Amud Beis, where it says that the Kohen Gadol, after receiving the Sefer Torah, the Kohen, he would read from it in the portion of Achrei Mois, which is exactly what we do today in the shul. Achrei Mois, we're speaking about not the whole Achrei Mois, but from the beginning until the end of the record of the Avodah of Yom Kippur, and then they would read from Ach Be'asar, which is a portion in Parshas Emor, that speaks about the karbanos and some halachis regarding Yom Kippur. That speaks about the halachis of Yom Kippur. And that was read from the Sefer Torah. Now, then the Mishnah said that he would also ring the karbanos that are recorded in Parshas Pinchas, which is in Bamidbar, but that is something that he read by heart. But the problem is that if he's reading an Achrei Mois, and then he's reading Ach Ba'asar in Parshas Emor, that means that the Kohen Gadol skipped many columns. Are you allowed to skip? Now, by the way, today, every time there's a fast day, and when we read Vayechal, people know. Vayechal from Parshas Kisisa. So Yitaka read, Vayechal begins in 1 column, and this Aliyah already of Levi, Psalacha, it's very nearby. People don't even notice that you needed to roll it for a column or 2, but you do skip over. Now, this topic of whether we are allowed to skip or not is discussed in Megillah, and it's a Mishnah. From a Mishnah in Megillah, it says, Medalgen ben Navi, when you would read Navi. Now, Navi, there was a time, whether it was the Greeks or whether it is the Romans, is a big machlokes. But there was a time in Jewish history that under the penalty of death, we were not allowed to read the Chumash in public. And being that the Torah reading was from the Nevi'im Rishonim, right, I think that Rambam writes, Moshe Rabbeinu. So they substituted temporarily the reading from Torah with certain passages of Nevi'im, not even from Ksuvim, from Nevi'im, that has in its content the same content of the Torah reading. And that was read not out of a book, but they had the Nevi'im written on a parchment and ink like a Sefer Torah. So says the Mishnah that when you are reading from the Navi, you are allowed to skip over. But the Medalgin b'Torah, when you're reading from the Torah, you may not skip. But here we see clearly in our Mishnah that the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur would skip. Answers the Gemara loy kasha. Kan, meaning the Mishnah Megillah, that does not allow us to skip over was b'chdei sheyafsek haturgaman. The way Torah was read then is that after every verse read from the Sefer Torah in Lashon HaKodesh, obviously you had someone who interpreted that verse. So there was a Meturgaman. Now it took the Meturgaman, whatever it took him, to translate over what was read inside. If you are jumping that many columns, that even after the Meturgaman, the interpreter, would finish interpreting, the reader would not yet be up to the new location, so there would be a moment of silence. That's not allowed. When you're jumping, when you're skipping too far away, so there's going to be a hefsek even after the Meturgaman. But our Mishnah, the Kohen Gadol, when he went from Parshas Achrimois until the Parsha of Emor, it's so near in the Torah that there was a Meturgaman. See, today, without a Meturgaman, even though it's very near, but it's going to take a moment or two, it didn't make any interruption. Because during the time that the Meturgaman was interpreting the last thing said by the Kohen Gadol, whatever that time was, that was enough time for the Kohen Gadol to be up to Emor. And that's allowed. Says the Gemara, that's not true. You're not learning good pshat in the Mishnah Megillah. Because for Allah Kitani, regarding the Mishnah Megillah, it says that Medalgin the Navi, the Ein Medalgin B'Torah, teaches the Beraisa, Va'at Kama Medalig, even in the Navi, it's not that you can just skip anywhere you want. Even in the Navi, it's only B'chtei Shalei Yafsek HaTurgaman. It's only in a way, there they also interpreted it. And it's only if there won't be a moment of silence. There'll be no break in time. Now, if that condition is given even by Navi, is araya habetoira klal v'klaloi. But again, here we see that they would skip over. So Amar Abaya loy kashe, another nuance, another knech. Kan b'inyan echad. There's two things: not having anyone in the tzibur wait. On top of that, jumping is in itself disrespectful. But if you're going from one place to another place in a Sefer Torah, but that's speaking about the same topic, which is Yom Kippur, that's allowed. Avad, it's only allowed if no one is going to have to wait. So not only wasn't there a hefsek, but it's being an echad, that's allowed. And the Braisa, that's authentic. That explains the Mishnah Megillah, the second to last line, Kan b'shnei inyanim. So b'shnei inyanim in Nach, or Nevi'im, is allowed only if people are not going to have to wait. And indeed, ve'hotanya, that's b'nichusa, that medalgim b'toira b'inyan echad, u'benavi b'shnei inyanim, and kan ve'kan, clear. B'chtei shalei yafsek haturgaman. Furthermore, says this Beraisa, the last line in the Amit, ve'ein medalgim b'navi l'navi. Even though you are allowed to skip over in the Navi, you have to stick to the same book. You can't jump from one Sefer Navi to another. However, ubenavi shall shneim asar, we call it trei asar, that is 12 very short Sfarim of the Nevi'im. There they are halachically considered like one volume. There, yes, medalgan, you can skip from one to the other, daf ayin, but here also, ubilvad shelo yedalig misayfar sefer l'tchilasi. Don't skip backwards. Even in the Trei Asar. My friends, there's a big machlokes here. What does it mean, don't skip backwards? Everyone subscribes not skipping backwards means don't go from one Sefer to a prior Sefer, even though it's small Sfarim and it's all together and no one is going to have to wait because they had a Meturgaman. Don't go backwards from one book to the other book. The question is, are you allowed to go backwards in the same Sefer? Something that people might not be aware, that we established that in the same Sefer you are allowed to skip backwards. You know where that is? Open up the Chumash and you'll see that the Haftarah of Mishpatim, this is the only Haftarah from the whole year. The Haftarah of Mishpatim, we're going backwards. It's all in Yirmiyah. Yirmiyah Lamed Daled First we read Psukim Ches to Chav Beis, and then we go to Yirmiyah Lamed Gimel, which is only one Perek prior. So you appreciate that even when they would read it from a Sefer, the time that it would take to only go back one chapter would be less than the time of the interpreter. But the second reading of Mishpatim is Lamed Gimel, Chafei and Chavav. Amazing. So we actually opine that Shelo Yedalig Misefer Sefer L'Tchilase means in the Trei Asar, going from one book to the other. Okay, let's go weiter. Then it says, so here he was allowed to roll it because the interpreter is interpreting the last pasuk in Achrei Mois. It gave enough time for the Kohen Gadol to go in the same inyan of Yom Kippur to Ach Ba'asar, which is in Parshas Emor. But even though he's going to be reading from Chomesh HaPikudim, Parshas Pinchas, but now V'goylel Sefer Torah, remember? And he would make as a declaration that more than what I read before you was written here. Why would he have to make that declaration? Roll it and then say then Ex Parsha by heart. The Kol Kach Lama, says the Gemara, Kadesh Lo Hoitzi Laz al Sefer Torah. You don't want to cast aspersions on the Sefer Torah because the observer might think erroneously, why is he reading it by heart? Maybe this Sefer Torah doesn't have in it the Parsha of Pinchas. Or maybe the Sefer Torah became an apostle. So he would make it clear, no, more than what I read from you is written here, but it's self-understood why he's not going to be reading it from inside, as we'll see, because of Kavarat Tzibur. Now, by the way, this is a very important halacha l'maisa. And that is that they say that one of the most important topics in halacha that every Rav needs to be familiar with, vishinamtam, chedudim, is dinim of psuli sefer Torah. Because in almost all other halachas, if you have a shaila, is the chicken kosher or not, you don't have to have the answer right away. You can open up a sefer and look. But we see the importance of whatever is done in the tzibur should be done without delay. That's the whole sugya here. So what happens if there's a shaila in the Sefer Torah? A Rav has to know right away the halacha. And there are many halachas. It's not so simple. But one attitude which has to be uprooted is, if there is a shaila, let's take out another Sefer Torah. I guess we covered our bases. Absolutely not. Because if a Sefer Torah is halachically kosher, we see that we are machabed the Sefer Torah. We take the Kohen Gadol made the declaration Shaloi lo hoitzi laz al Sefer Torah, and we have to be careful likewise. If a Sefer Torah is kosher, use it. If not, you're being moitzi laz on the Sefer Torah. And ube'eser shel chomesh hapikudim koira al peh. Now, why Baal Peh and Shlema? You asked that question when we learned the Mishnah. Why? Nigloil v'nikrei, roll it and read it. So for this, the answer is Amar Rav Huna Berei Rabbi Yeshua Amar Rav Sheishes Alafi she'ein goylon sefer Torah b'tzibur. That's the whole topic we learned in the beginning of today's class because of Kavarat Tzibur. But here comes the question. This is what you asked. V'naisachrina v'nikrei. Why didn't they take out two sefer Torah? My friends, today we take out two sefer Torah. So answers the Gemara. Rav Huna Bar Yehuda says Mishum Pegamai Shel Rishain. Wow. Again. You're going to cast aspersions. You're going to discredit the first. People are going to see you taking out a second Sefer Torah. They're going to think, why are you not reading it from the first one? Because it's invalid. That's not true. Imagine. And Avshlakish says, Mishum bracha she'eino tzricha. This is amazing. I want to quickly go back to the Mishnah. The Mishnah said that the Kohen Gadol makes 8 brachas after the reading. After the reading. The Mishnah made no mention of whether the Kohen Gadol makes the bracha asher bachar banu prior to the reading. And indeed, there's a machlekes rishonim how to learn the Mishnah. Let's side now. Let's just give words to those rishonim who use this line in the Gemara to prove that the Mishnah is opining that the Kohen Gadol, yes, made a bracha prior to the reading. The Mishnah just doesn't write it because there's no chiddush with that. The chiddush is that when we read the Torah today, post-reading, we only make one bracha, asher nasalanu Torah semes. In the Beis HaMikdash, the Kohen Gadol didn't make one, he made 8. But he made a bracha prior. Now it fits. And what does it fit? If you read one reading from 2 Sifrei Torah, right, then you would have to make a new bracha prior. You would have to make if you're going to read out of 2 Sifrei Torah, same person is called up, the fact that you took out another Sefer Torah will demand of you to make another bracha. And since this could be done by reading it by heart, how careful we are not to make a bracha she'ein tzricha, which would be the bracha prior. The bracha post is being made anyways. Let's go back on the first approach, that if you take out a second Sefer Torah, that somehow discredits the first. Why is that? We see that we don't have that chashashu. And this is one of the very few cases that not two, but we take out three Sifrei Torah. Rosh Chodesh Tevis is always on Chanukah. But if it falls out on Shabbos, so you have Sai Shabbos, and Sai Rosh Chodesh, and Sai Chanukah, Mivian Sholish Toiros. And V'koiden, and based on the order of Tadr V'she'ena Tadr, Tadr Koidem, the most frequent comes first, Achaz Bilyana Shel Yom, which will be the Seder of the week, or in English, the Parsha of the week, V'achaz Shel Rosh Chodesh, which is Rosh Chodesh Tevis, and V'achaz Shel Chanukah. And we know we do this. And even more often, two Sifrei Torah. So you don't have a chashash of Pigamoi Shalisha. Now, Bracha She'ein Tzricha answers the question. But really it's going to be answered the same way from a different angle in the answer. So the Gemara says, Gavaldik. Tlasa Gavra B'tlasa Sfarei. Then like a Pigama. If you're calling up different people, which is what we do now, every time you change a Sefer Torah, you're calling someone else up, then no one is going to view this as we are discrediting the first. But since Danny Noch mentioned at the end of last year, what about giving kavod l'Talmud b'makom harav? You call different people up for Aliyahs. You know what? On Yom Kippur, only one got an Aliyah. Only the Kohen Gadol. So it's the same person reading for, if there would be more than one Sefer Torah, it will be the same person. Chad Gavra, B'trei Sifra, that already looks worse. Because he's anyways up. So why are you bringing out another Sefer Torah? People might think that the first one is discredited. And therefore, he would dafka read it, but read it Baal Peh. Now, this is not discussed over here, but we have this whole concept of Dvarim Shebechsav I Ater Reshoy Lo Amru Baal Peh. If you remember that whole sugya, where we spoke about people saying the Shema by heart. By the way, that's something that's negeya to how was the Kohen Gadol B'chal allowed to say out words of Torah Shebechsav Baal Peh. He had a Sefer Torah in front of him. Anyways, let's go right. And he made after he finished reading the Chomesh HaPikudim Shmoine Brachas. What are the Shmoine Brachas? So the Braisa elaborates a little bit more. We read this when we learned the Mishnah with the Rashi. Tanach Rabbanan. The first bracha is Ala Torah Keneged Shemavarchem Beis HaKnesses, and that is Asher Nasan Lanu. The second bracha is Al Avodah Ritzei. The third bracha is Hoida'a, which is what we call Maidim. This is parts of brachas that we say in the Shemona Esrei. The fourth bracha is Al Mechila Sa'avin, which we read this in Rashi. Al Mechila, all of Sai, the first, the Torah, and Avodah, and Hoida'a, and Mechila Sa'avin, says the Braisa is Ketikna. It's all according to its standard formula. I don't know what picture we're going to bring over here. Right, and because this is something that we have today in the Machzorim. But you know what was unique? Al Hamikdash. A bracha for the Beis Hamikdash b'fnei atzmai, v'al hakoyanim b'fnei atzman, v'al Yisrael b'fnei atzman, and v'al Sharat Tefilla, which concluded with the word Shemei Tefilla. Ooh, that was something unique to indeed, that was made once a year by the Kohen Gadol after he finished reading on Yom Kippur. First white line. And at least here we're going to have more details of the bracha Sharat Tefilla. Tanach Rabbanan v'Sharat Tefilla, what was the entirety of the formulation of the bracha? This is what the Kohen Gadol said. Rina, Tchina Bakasha, prayer, supplication, right, and requests, Milfanecha, from before you, for whom Al Amcha Yisrael, that shetzrichim lihivasha, that they need to be saved, and v'choisim b'shomei tefillah. Now, look at this step that the Mishnah doesn't mention. V'achar kach kol echad ve'echad mevi sefer Torah mi beisoi. All of the Yidden, thousands of Yidden, 10,000s of Yidden, would take out a sefer Torah from their homes. Says Rashi, they brought their sefer Torah out of Yom Kippur, even though we just learned last week, some who held that you can carry on Yom Kippur, but we don't paskin that way. They did not rely on the Eruv, on the walled city of Yerushalayim. Rashi says they brought it there prior to Yom Kippur, and they would pull it out, and they would read from their Sifrei Torah, to display the beautiful appearance of their Sefer Torah to the public. Very similar is nowadays amongst some communities that, for example, on the Sukkos, everyone pulls out their esrog, and whether they're doing this explicitly or implicitly, they're basically showing off, wow, look how beautiful my esrog is. And this is a concept that is of positive nature. that we're beautifying the mitzvahs, and we are creating as a kinna seifrim tarba chachma, not chachma for learning, but for chachma for keeping the mitzvahs. So this was the opportunity. Every yid has a mitzvah to write a sefer Torah. Many people owned sefer Torah that they kept in their homes, and on Yom Kippur they would pull it out right now and show. They would read it in order for everyone to see. Wow, look at the sefer Torah that you have. Then it says the Mishnah that Haroya Kohen Gadol Chuli, that whoever was there during the reading was not able to witness the Kohen burning the so'ir and the par over there, whether it is L'tzfayna Shal Yerushalayim, whether it is L'mizracha Shal Yerushalayim. Why? Not because you were not allowed to, but Mipnei She'en Erushay. The distance was so far away that it's not possible. And just to quote that Danny spoke out at the end of the recording, that this is a great example of the concept of going on talucha. In other words, who would even want to go and see the Kohen burning if you have the option of watching the Kohen Gadol reading this from the Sefer Torah that was written by Moshe Rabbeinu? Ein achanami. Hecher, holier might have been to stay in. But that needed to get done, and you want to bring some enthusiasm to that as well. And the Mishnah emphasizes that if so the Gemara says pshita. In other words, why would you think that if it was closer, one would have not been allowed to go to both? The Mishnah is really saying that if it would have been closer, you can go to both. A little bit here, a little bit there. Tansen of Beida Chasanas. And taka, but there's a novelty to that. What's the novelty? Because you would have thought that even if they were close by, once you are part of one mitzvah, don't leave in the middle. Don't leave in the middle because you're going to diminish the glory in the current one. So the Narvas, then you are allowed to do that. The only reason why people didn't do it is because there wasn't enough time. Look at this application. Don't go over a mitzvah. And therefore, and my mitzvah, what's the mitzvah? How are you going away from a mitzvah? And if many people would leave one to the other, they would be diminishing the one that they're going away from. Komash Malan, that the only reason people did not go back and forth was because it was too far away and they were done at the same time. So it's technical. She'ena Rashoy. So if a person is involved or present at the one Fabrengen from a Chosid, and then Abza Andres Fabrengen over there, you can go from one place to the other. And we don't say Roiv Amadras Melech. All right, next Mishnah, like we mentioned, this is not the last Mishnah in the Perek. But this is not the last Mishnah in the Perek, but this is the last Mishnah regarding the Avodah of the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur. Says the Mishnah like this: since we learned in the beginning of this chapter that the Kohen Gadol had the option whether to wear the big day boots for the reading of the Torah or whether he put on his own personal gartel, so accordingly, in the big day boots kaira, if he's still wearing the big day lovin, so right now is the time. Remember, prior to removing the begadim, he has to be mekadosh yadayim v'raglayim. So he did it right now, kiddush yadav v'raglav, and now he's going to go right into the big day zav. So pashat. He removes his garments, the big day boots, yarad v'taval, arav v'nestabog. He has to dry himself, just in case there's a little piece of some earth or some pebbles, and it's going to create a chatzitza. That was why he dried himself, to make sure that all of that is removed from his body, like we learned above. And now they would bring to him big day zahav, v'lavash, and he would get dressed. And again, the kiddush yadav v'raglav, and v'yotza. What did he do right now? The seder v'asas eloives el ha'am. These elim, these rams, are the two oilois that are mentioned in Parshas Achrei Mois, and the Eis Shivas Kavasim Temimim B'nei Shana, and he would bring the 7 lambs which are mentioned in Parshas Pinchas that are part of Musaf. So holds Rabbi Eliezer. In other words, these Shivas Kavasim were not brought earlier. And this is subject to a machlokes. Rabbi Akiva Oimer, no. The 7 sheep, clearly, they're only written in Pinchas, but they're connected to the Musaf of Yom Kippur. They were brought even before he put on the big dilav the first time. He put on the big dilav the first time. Remember, Chevra, that was ultimately when he was going to be bringing the ketoides inside, and the damapad, and the damasoid. Prior to that is when he brought the Shiva, the Musaf. Because Musaf has to be adjacent and right after Shachris. Now, the big question is, the word upar ha'oila. This par la'oila, part of Musaf, is also mentioned in Pinchas. We don't know whether Rabbi Akiva is including Par Ha'oila together with the 7 lambs, and now is where you make a comma, and then you read, and the soid Hanasa B'chutz, also mentioned in Pinchas, is brought with the Talmud Shel Bein Harabayim. That's one way of learning Rabbi Akiva. Or Rabbi Akiva is only saying that the 7 lambs are brought in the morning. Comma. Opar ha'oila and the soid hanasa b'chutz goes with the afternoon. That will be clarified in the Gemara. We're going to come back to it. In other words, there's a comma that we don't have clarity from reading the Mishnah where you placed. Be that as it may, at this point, once the soid hanasa b'chutz is done, that's the last thing that's mentioned here in the Mishnah. What is still left? What's left is he has to still go back into the Holy of Holies because he never yet removed the kaf and the machta. And that was the psukim, like we mentioned, the Nachri Mois, the only pasuk that's out of the order. Now, Kiddush Yodav et Aglov, Ufashad v'Yodav v'Tavel v'Adon Estabog, and V'Yolei Big Day Lovin, and V'Lavash Kiddush Yodav et Aglov. The reason for that we learned was because since we have a Masayda that there has to be 5 mikvahs and 10 kiddushim, that's the only way you're going to get to that number. That's the way we learned Pshat in the Gemara above. And now, Nichnas, he entered the Holy of Holies. To remove the ladle that used to have in it the ketoides, to remove the machta that had in it the coals that was used upon which to burn the ketoides. And now, again, for the final time, he's getting back into his big days of is Kiddush Yodav et Aglov. We read all this in the davening on Yom Kippur. Fashat v'yorad v'tovel olav and istapog. Hiviolay big days of v'lavash Kiddush Yodav et Aglov. And now he has to conclude the avoid of the day, the Tmidim Kisidron. What was the avoid of the day? Nichnas lahaktir ketoyre shel beinu arbaim. Now he's going to bring. We're mentioning some of the afternoon avoida, which is what is done every day, which is the bringing of the ketoyres. Ulehetiv es haneiros. Quickly, parenthetically, that's problematic because it was in the afternoon that the Kohen Gadol was madlik the neiros. So either it's lavdafke or mikan, the standalone sheet of the Rambam that says that the words lehetiv and the words lahadlik technically refer to the same thing. The Rambam holds that even in the morning, the Kohen Gadol, the Kohen every day we would light the menorah twice, at night and in the morning. So either it's lehetiv or it's taka lahadlik. And Chavre, this is the 10th time. Kiddush Yodav et Aglov ufashat, not the parentheses. Now that he was Mekadosh Yadayim v'Raglayim, this is the 10th Kiddush. He removed the big day Zahav, and that's it. Now he's going to get dressed with his personal begadim. Hiviolay big day Atzmei v'Lavash, Melavan Oisay Ad Beisay, and v'Yom Tov Haya Oisay Lo Yoyhavav, he would arrange a feast for his Chavedim and the Kohen Gadol, all Kol Yisrael Chavedim, B'Shah Sheyatza B'Shalom and HaKodesh. Here in the Machzor is where we have our beautiful moment of Mordechay. That's where we go. That Ashrei, how fortunate are we that our neshama saw this, and God willing, we will see it this year. Yom Kippur, the Beis HaMikdash will be built, and how fortunate will be by witnessing this avoid. Now, the daf right now is going to be, you have to mamish learn how to love this. We're going to go into the steps that are ambiguous in the Mishnah, the Seder of the Karbanis, and let's begin now with the Shita of Rabbi Akiva. So Rabbi Akiva, like we mentioned, clearly he argues with Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Akiva says that the 7 lambs are brought in addendum to the Talmud Shel Shachar. But then when he speaks about Sai, the Par Ha'olam, Musaf, written in Pinchas, the Soid Anase B'chutz, another part of the Musaf, written in Pinchas, we don't know where to place the comma. That's what they struggled in the yeshiva. How do you read the Rabbi Akiva? Do you read it Im Talmud Shel Shachar Krevim and place the comma over here? That was done in the morning, but both the Par Ha'olah and the Soid Hanasa B'chutz was taka brought with the Talmud Shel Bein Ha'arbayim, which is when he would wear the big days off for the final time. Oy Dilma, place the comma after the words Par Ha'olah. Hachi Ka'amar, Im Talmud Shel Shachar Krevim, the 7 lambs, and Par Ha'olah with the 7 lambs connected to the morning, before he wore the big day lovin for the first time. And it's only the Soid Hanasa B'chutz was brought in Talmud Shel Bein Ha'arbayim. That was the first thing that they didn't understand when they were learning the Mishnah in the yeshiva. Question number 2, what was not clear? So, we don't understand. Let's go back now to Rabbi Eliezer. Upar Ha'olah, Rabbi Eliezer, he never mentioned it. Rabbi Eliezer didn't speak about the Par. Now, Par Ha'olah, really, Rashi says, it's not only par ha'olam. Rabbi Eliezer didn't mention the soid hanasa b'chutz as well. So just as a rule, Rashi writes over here, that's what the Gemara meant. No, it's these two karbanis, the par mentioned in Pinchas, Musaf, the soid hanasa b'chutz. That was the soid that we didn't want it for it to get confused with both the seirim. Remember that? The sharia means he omitted it. So taka amos ovidle l'Rabbi Eliezer. When was it brought? And the final vesu bein l'Rabbi Eliezer and bein l'Rabbi Akiva. We're just going back a few daf. We learned on daf samach zayin omid beis. The kohen gadol would go ahead. He would rip the animals, the pot and the soil open. He would place the emurim in a bowl. The Gemara made it clear that it was not offered right then. Okay, so when was it offered? The Mishnah doesn't write about it. Emurei chatos emas avid lahu. Sinishklar. And indeed, Amarava, that lo mashkachas lo mitakanta, that when you read our Mishnah, you will not find, not only not explicitly, even implicitly, which is what the Gemara normally does, we don't have clarity. And we have to go to other works that we have. And ultimately, what Rava was megale, that we have detailed clarity, Shitas Rabbi Eliezer, from a Braisa that was taught in the yeshiva of Shmuel, Rabbi Eliezer, the Tani Devei Shmuel. Or where do we find clarity, Beshitas Rabbi Akiva, from a Tosefta? But we have those works of Tanoim written in the general Braisas, and now we will go there to clarify all of the questions above. So let's go. The Tani Devei Shmuel, the Braisa that he taught over there in the yeshiva of Shmuel, writes that Rabbi Eliezer Omer, Chavra, the first widest line, 3 lines before the bottom of the Amid, that we're speaking about the third mikvah, now that he put on the golden garments, right? Our Mishnah speaks about it over here, but it's much more elaborate. That Yatza, V'asa Eloi ve'el ha'am, the two oilos, these two oilos are mentioned only in Achremois. And clearly, and now they brought Rabbi Eliezer Emurei chatos, which were sitting in a bowl already prior, Aval par ha'olam, and the Shivas Kvasim, and the Soran Asa Bachutz. Rabbi Eliezer is consistent. The ganze Musaf was brought with Talmud Shel Beinu Arbayim, Beferish. And Rabbi Akiva will have more clarity, especially where to put the comma, as we see in the Tosefta. Rabbi Akiva the Tosefta, Mahi the Tanya, Rabbi Akiva Oimer, Par Ha'oila, the Shivas Kevasim were brought in Talmud Shel Shacharoi Krevim, clearly. In other words, in our Mishnah, put the comma after the words Par Ha'oila. The only carbon of Musaf, Rabbi Akiva, that was taka brought with Talmud Shel Beinu Arbayim prior to, but in addendum with, that was only the Soid Anasa B'chutz. And now let's explain Shitas Rabbi Akiva, that aside of the one exception, Musaf is connected to Shachris. Where does he get it from? Not from a pasuk connected to Yom Kippur, but from a pasuk in Pinchas. The first time the Torah speaks about the Karbanos Musaf. Now, the first Yom Tov always recorded as Pesach, and it says in Pinchas regarding the Musaf, Milvad oilas haboiker asher lo oilas hatamid. No, it's when the pasuk introduces the Musafin that are brought on Pesach, and therefore all of the Yomim Tovim, it's brought Milvad oilas haboiker. Oilas haboiker is the Talmud Shel Shachar, and now connected to, in addendum with, even Bisman, right afterwards comes the Musaf. And V'acharkach, so therefore on Yom Kippur, bring almost all the Karbanos Musaf, the Shivas Kavasim, the Par Ha'olam, together with the Oilas HaTamid. And afterwards will be when the Kohen Gadol now will put on the Big Day Lavan for the first time, Avodas Hayoim, which is ultimately where he's going to bring in the Ketoides Lefnai V'Lefnim, and Damapan, and Damasoyer, V'chulei, Daf, Ayin Omid Beis, V'acharkach. The only one exception, L'Rabbi Akiva, of a carbon connected to Musaf, that's not brought in adjacent to the morning Tamid, is the Soyer Hanasa B'chutz. There is a comma in the Mishnah. Got to be placed somewhere. So it's placed at the end. Now, where does he get that from? Oh, so Shenemar, again in Parshas Pinchas, and that's, yes, Yom Kippur, where it says, Seir izim echot chatos, milvad chatos akipurim. Chatas HaKippurim is the inner chatas, which is the par and the soir. And here the Torah connects that the soir that is brought of Musaf, milvad. Milvad means in addendum to, afterwards. Gavaldik. So that's why that's an exception. Now we're continuing to read in the Tosefta that elaborates with greater clarity, Bishitas Rabbi Akiva, all of the steps. Ve'achar kach, Eloi ve'el ha'am. Here again, one of the questions they asked in the yeshiva now, Rabbi Akiva, when were the Emurei Chatas brought? The Mishnah doesn't mention it. Not even in an implied way. V'acharkach Emurei Chatas, and now Talmud shel Beinu Arbaim. Gavaldik. Now, fragt die Gemara, my Talmud Rabbi Eliezer, that's the question. In other words, Rabbi Eliezer holds that what? That the karbanos of Musaf are not beroiv, at least, beruba deruba, brought in addendum to Shachris. Why not? Rabbi Eliezer is also moida. Let's go to Parshas Pinchas, that generally Musaf comes right after Shachris. Here it's not so. Why not? You know why? Because when you open up a Parshas Achrei Mois, aside of the only exception, we spoke about the Kaf and the Machta and the Eloi, aside of flipping those psukim, mamish, everything is written ala Seder. So Rabbi Eliezer says, Ovid Kidduch Siv, I want to follow the Seder in the Psukim, and it's not only following the Seder of Achrei Mois. We're going to say that the whole Chumash HaPikudim, the entire Parshas Pinchas, which is Musaf, is written a whole Chumash after the Avodah of Yom Kippur. Ovid Kidduch Siv, Ovid Bereisha, the Toras Kahanim. Everything that's written in Achrei Mois, and that goes first. And only later do you do Chumash HaPikudim. So that's why when it comes to Yom Kippur, Rabbi Eliezer, but even the Shivas HaKvasim, all of that is brought after the many steps, after the Avodas HaPnim, after the Kohen Gadol now was changing out again to his big day Lovin, to his big day Zov, the third change. Rabbi Akiva holds the tonic timing like we had in the Tosefta in the bottom of Amud Aleph, even though Chumash HaPikudim is written later, doesn't matter. We learn from over there because it says regarding the Musaf of Pesach. We apply that binyanav to all musafim. Milvad oilas haboiker asher lo oilas hatamid. That's the klal alma that musafin im tamud shachar avidlu. Nekuda. Now Rabbi Eliezer, hi milvad chatas hakipurim my avidlei. We're speaking about the shivas hakavasim, right? In other words, why Nachamal the pasuk juxtaposes, the pasuk is makish, the inner chatos with the outer chatos. The inner one should be brought first and only afterwards, and then only afterwards, answers the Gemara that Rabbi Eliezer will teach the juxtaposition of these two chatos, of the inner and the outer soir, to tell you another din, that al-masha zemachaper. And Bekitzer, we're going to learn this again when we learn Shavuos. That when we're speaking about the atonement specifically for Tumas Migdash Ukadashav, which is either entering the temple Betuma or eating Kachim Betuma, there are really three ways that someone might have violated this Isur. One is without any knowledge. A person never knew that they're Tamei. Then there is some knowledge. Some knowledge means there's two options. Either there was Yediyah Mitchila that I'm Tamei, or Yediyah Mitchila that this is the Makim HaMikdash. We'll learn all those details in Shavuos. And then in a state of Helam, the person violated Migdash, Tumas Migdash Ukadashav, or the person never knew that they were Tamei when they violated, but then there was a Yediyah. In other words, that both of these Seirim that bring atonement for Tumas Migdash Ukadashav, it only brings atonement if there was either Yediyah Mitchila or Yediyah Basoif, and more details we'll learn in Shavuos, which one was for Yediyah Mitchila, which one is Yediyah Basoif. But the Hekesh is really teaching us in the negative that if a Yid violated Tumas Migdash Ukadashav, total in a state of Helam, these karbanos brought no atonement. Now, the Gemara continues quoting the Tosefta. So Atkan was Shitas Rabbi Akiva, the way we have it in the Mishnah, just more elaborated. But now we're going to have two other Tanoim, Bishitas Rabbi Akiva, that hold regarding the Shivas HaKavasim that they're not brought the way we have the version of Rabbi Akiva in the Mishnah and in the Tosefta. Rabbi Yehuda says, Mishma in the name of Rabbi Akiva, that the 7 Kavasim were not brought all together. They were divided. How were they divided? How do you divide 7? Well, first of all, it's going to be majority-minority. But we're going to make a pure majority and minority. It's going to be 1 and 6. The first one, Echad Karevim Talmud Shel Shachar. And the other 6 are going to be brought in addendum with the Talmud Shel Beinu Arbaim. Vishish Talmud Shel Beinu Arbaim. And now the third Shita, B'Shitas Rabbi Akiva, Tanakama is all together. Our Mishnah is all together. Rabbi Yehuda says 1 and 6, and Rabbi Elazar ben Rabbi Shimon says, again in the name of Rabbi Akiva, Punkt Fakert, we divide the Shivas HaKavasim, 6 in the morning and 1 in the afternoon. Before we get into why 1 and 6 or 6 and 1, why does both Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Elazar ben Rab Shimon, they had that tradition. But what would be the logic of dividing the 7 lambs? You know why? Because today, because we have a contradiction regarding the Musaf of Yom Kippur, as we just learned above. In one pasuk it says, that's Rabbi Akiva. It says, Milvad Oilas HaBoker, which implies that the Musafim, including the 7 lambs, should be right after the morning Talmud. However, it says in Achrei Mois, the oila that we spoke about, which is also part of Musaf, is not brought in addendum to the morning. The Fedish not. Like we learned, the oila is only brought after he did all of the first steps of the Avodah B'Big Day Lovin, the Ketores and the Paranasa B'Fnim and the Soranasa B'Fnim. He read the Torah. So many things were done before Musaf. So you see that by Yom Kippur we have an exception that at least some of the Musaf is done later. So therefore, when it comes to the 7 lambs that are only mentioned in Pinchas, we divide that. Okay, but the question is, what's their machlekes? Why 1-6 or 6-1? And now, Rabbi Yehuda holds that Savar Ovid Chad, do 1, do the minimum. Why do the minimum? First of all, we do the minimum because it says Milvad Oilas HaBoker. Do the minimum you need to do of Musaf, because we want to save the koyach of the Kohen Gadol for the unique avodas of the day. Right before he's tired, before the chush of the Kohen Gadol, and then at the end, leave for last that which is relatively the least important. And Musaf, of course, everything is important, but it's not avodas hayoim. Rabbi Elazar ben Rab Shimon says the opposite. The very fact that one could erroneously think that Musaf is not that important, so every Kohen Gadol, even the ones that were unworthy, they're going to do everything that you need to do in order to get to avodas hayoim. The question is, what was the attitude of the Kohen Gadol after he did the avodas hayoim? Yeah, Baruch, let me go back to what you mentioned. We learned above, right? That was Rabbi Shmuel, Kohen Gadol, the son of Paveh, the son of the woman that covered her hair the whole time, Kimchis, that he became Tameh at the break, and his brothers, and ultimately aside of him, 6 of his brothers served once as a Kohen Gadol. Right, the Gemara over there mentions 2, but it was more than 2. Why is that? Why did he become Tameh then? Because he felt that he already did the Ikar Avodas Hayom. What's done later is less important. So the Adarabah, get in as much as you could prior to the Avodas Hayom to make sure that all of that will be done. Once you start, you have to for sure bring some of the 7 in the morning. So bring 6 of them. Because God forbid, not by Rabbi Shmuel, but other Kahana Gedolim, maybe they will be pashut negligent by feeling I did the Avodas Hayom, so nish gefährlich that I didn't do the Musaf. The Gab Avodas Hayom Zorasu Nikuda. Now says the Gemara, let's go back to Bechlal, Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Akiva, the Kula Alma Mios Chad Ayelhu. We never mentioned, not in the Mishnah, not in the Tosefta, not in the Tanach of Shmuel, that there are 2 rams. Now this is something of a chiddush. Why is that something of a chiddush? Because in Achrei Mois we read about the ram. In Parshas Pinchas we also read about the ram. You know, the 7 lambs are not mentioned in Achrei Mois. Gavaldik, so there was only 7 lambs. But since the Torah mentions the ayol 2 times, we will see that actually some Tanoim held that 2 rams were brought in Musaf. One of them I mentioned in Achrei, one in Pinchas. But it's from our elaboration, not from the Braisas, it comes out clearly, the Kula Almamiyas Chad Ayelhu, that Sayyid Rabbi Eliezer and both Rabbi Akiva subscribe that the same ayel that's mentioned in Achrei, that's the same ayel mentioned in Pinchas. And you should know, says the Gemara, that that's really subject to a machlokes Tanoim. And both Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Akiva, they subscribe to that which we clearly see from Shitas Rebbe. The Tanya Rebbe Oimer, that there was really one ayel echad. That's the same one, Ha'amur Khan, that's the one that's mentioned in Achrei Mois, that's the one that's mentioned in Chomesh HaPikud and Parshas Pinchas. But Rabbi Elazar ben Rab Shimon Oimer, that was Shnei Elim. Echad Ha'amur Khan, the taka 2 separate ones. Ve'echad Ha'amur b'Chomesh HaPikudim. My Talmud the Rebbe, Pashit, because the Torah mentioning both in Achri and in Pinchas, the Torah says Ayil Echad. The Torah could have said Ayil. Ayil is Lashon Yachid. Why Echad? Fakert. Since this one of Musaf, one detail of Musaf is mentioned twice, Hashem wants to make it clear it's the same one. But Rabbi Elazar ben Rabbi Shimon says, no. The Torah writes Echad to tell you that this ayol has to be miyuchid shebe idroi. It has to be the choicest one, the most qualified, the most beautiful. What about the Rebbe? Rebbe holds that there's no need to specify regarding this chiyuv carbon detail of Musaf that it has to be miyuchad, because there is a general statement that we have in Parshas Re'eh. Emes is Parshas Re'eh is not speaking about a choiva carbon, it's speaking about nedarim and nedavis, which is voluntary carbonis. The Torah uses the words mifchar nedorecha. Mifchar implies, according to Rebbe, that all karbanis, not only over there of a neder, which is a voluntary, even by a choiv, it has to be mifchar the choicest. So since we know the din of miyuchad from over there, so therefore Rebbe uses the echad to emphasize it's the same one. And Elyahu ben Rabbi Shimon holds that we need to have Hashem writing twice the concept, the din, that ideally it should be from the choicest one. And one is here. Where did Hashem choose to write this punkt on the Musaf of the Ayel of Yom Kippur? There were two Eilim. Eloma Echad means the choicest one, and Taka in Parshas Re'eh where it says Mifchar Nedorecha v'chad b'nedav. And why wouldn't we know one from the other? Because Tzrichei, let's read this out in Rashi, and then we'll leave the continuation for the tomorrow's shiur. V'tzrichei, 3 lines before the bottom, sheyesh das noito loimer, that nedava muvcheres. If you're bringing in a dava, like either you're doing something that's not a chiyuv, do it or don't do it. If you're doing it, go all the way. It's azal logic. But if you're doing something that's of an obligation nature, you can't demand even lachatchila to go all the way. It might be nice, but there's no inyan to do it. There is kadesha tehei mikubelas beratzin. You want for Hashem to receive it in favor. You do something, do it all the way. You do a favor and then you put up a bad word. You yotza schare b'avseidei. But the other hand is yesh das noita loimer, the last line in Rashi, the opposite. When you're doing something that's beyond the letter of the law, just the fact that you're doing it is already beautiful. You don't have to, in that, pick the choicest one. The opposite, that when you're doing something that's an obligation, to make it clear that we are not mekabel oil without joy. I have to do it, nebach. No, that I'm rejoicing in my chayva. Dafke by a chayva du mifchar. And by the way, we have the inyan by both, but he holds that you needed to have a special limit for each one. And God willing, we're going to continue Kiddush Adav Araglav in the next year. Just